Good afternoon, everybody. We are now entering into session number S51, the Dyslexia Dilemma, Identification and Intervention. With us today is Peter Groth. He's the CEO of Dyslexia Connect Online Tutoring. Peter Groth graduated summa cum laude from Edgewood College in 2002. In 2004, Peter began working part-time as a private tutor for several different subjects. Peter enjoyed tutoring a great deal and found it so personally rewarding that he decided to pursue tutoring full-time, specializing in dyslexia tutoring. Identifying the need for a service offering online dyslexia tutoring, Peter founded Dyslexia Connect in 2010, and it became the first online dyslexia tutoring service available. Dyslexia Connect provides online dyslexia tutoring to school districts as well as private clients. So with that, here is Peter.
Great. Thank you very much, Gary. I just wanted to start today by thanking everybody for being here in this presentation today. I know you've been in a lot of meetings over the past couple of days, and I appreciate you making time in your busy schedule and busy conference schedule to attend this session today. And I'd also like to thank Gary for hosting and thank Case for allowing me to make this presentation. I'm very passionate about dyslexia awareness, and I'm just very excited to be able to talk about this topic with you today. So Gary provides some great information on me. As you mentioned, I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Dyslexia Connect Online Tutoring, and we offer online dyslexia tutoring to school districts as well as individual families. I'd like to start today by talking about a student who I worked with named Oscar. Now, Oscar was in 7th grade, and when I started working with him, he had already been in tutoring for a number of years. He was actually referred to me by a colleague of mine who had been working with him for a few months, and she was telling me that she just wasn't really connecting with Oscar and tutoring wasn't going very well, and she wondered if I wanted to give a try working with him to see if maybe we had a better connection with each other. Oscar was having a lot of trouble reading. He had difficulty reading 2nd grade material, sometimes 1st grade material. He often struggled with reading even 3 or 4 letter words. And even when he was able to read material, he would often skip around. He would skip words, add extra words into the sentences. So his reading accuracy was very poor. And as a result, his reading comprehension was very poor as well. Now, one other thing about Oscar is one of the most intelligent students I have ever worked with. So what was going on here? Well, the answer to that is dyslexia. I'd like to take a moment and look at a definition of dyslexia, and this is provided by the International Dyslexia Association, and it's a pretty good definition. It says that dyslexia is a specific learning disability that is neurobiological in origin. It is characterized by difficulties with accurate and/or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. Secondary consequences may include problems in reading comprehension and reduced reading experience that can impede growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. So that's a pretty good definition of what dyslexia is. So who has dyslexia? Well, it's estimated by most researchers that 5 to 10% of the United States population and the world's population has some level of dyslexia. So who has dyslexia? Well, you've probably heard about a lot of people actually who have dyslexia. There are all kinds of very well-known people in all different fields and jobs who have dyslexia. Richard Branson, the famous entrepreneur, has dyslexia, and in fact, he does all kinds of dyslexia advocacy work. He recently started an organization, I think a year or two ago, called Made by Dyslexia, which is all about raising dyslexia awareness. Oscar-winning actress Octavia Spencer has dyslexia, and she's very outspoken about it, her struggles in her life, and outspoken about the challenges of dyslexia and trying to raise awareness about it. There are lots of individuals with dyslexia in the tech industry. Bill Gates has dyslexia. Steve Jobs also had dyslexia. And in the tech industry, that is not uncommon, in fact. We see lots of founders and CEOs of companies who have dyslexia. Damon John, the well-known entrepreneur and the member of the Shark Tank team, has dyslexia and often speaks about it at different events and on his social media channels. Director Steven Spielberg has dyslexia, actress Jennifer Aniston, and Whoopi Goldberg as well. So you notice that there's a huge cross section of people who have dyslexia, and chances are if you were to look at a list of people, you'd probably recognize a lot more names because there are all kinds of celebrities and all kinds of very respected people in different industries and different fields who have dyslexia. So we talked about the percentages of dyslexia and a few people who have it now, and also a definition. And now what I'd like to do is provide a dyslexia simulation. And I'm going to start this with a disclaimer. What you experience today does not actually simulate what a person with dyslexia sees. Unfortunately, we don't really have a way to do that at this time, but it does simulate what a person with dyslexia experiences. And so those are the feelings, the frustrations, the timidity, and also the insecurities that they might feel while trying to read and spell. And I should pause for a moment to thank my colleague, Nancy Harrison. She actually created a whole bunch of these slides for the dyslexia simulation that I'm going to be using today. So I'd like to thank her for doing that. So I'd like to start right now by asking you what you see on the screen. You see a pen, right? How about now? It's also a pen, just facing a different direction. And how about now? It's still a pen, right? What do you see on the screen now? That's the letter B, right? How about this one? The letter D. And now, the letter P. And finally, we have the letter Q. Now you notice that all of these letters have the same shape, right? They all have the same shape. The reason why we know they're different letters is just because they're in different positions on the page or on the screen. And I'm using these letters today because these letters tend to be very difficult for individuals with dyslexia. They have a very hard time remembering which letter is which. And so when they're reading, they quite often will flip these. They may see a B and say the D sound instead. They may be spelling a word and you'll ask them to spell bed and they'll start it with a D in fact. The P and the Q are also often mixed up. And the reason why these are so problematic, in fact, as I mentioned, is that they're the same shape. They're just determined by the position that they're in on the paper or on the screen. So now I would like to have you read some sentences. And I'm just going to give you a minute or so to do this. So go ahead and read these sentences as best you can. And then we're going to talk about them in just a moment. All right, so I'm going to give you couple more seconds to take a look at this, and then we're going to talk about these sentences. Okay, so you probably noticed that some of these sentences were really difficult to read, right? They seemed very jumbled. They were very tough. The blue sentences are what sentences look like to a typical reader. You notice that these are easy to read. After mowing the lawn, Dad asked Paula to help rake the yard. It's also easy for us to know what's going on in the story, right? We can identify the characters who are in the story. We can identify what they're doing easily. And if somebody asked us about this after we read the blue lines, we'd probably be able to give them a really good idea of what we just read and the context and the the information that was included. Now, the yellow sentences represent mild dyslexia. Let's take a look at one of those. Paul saw eager to help dad, put the yard was really dig, and he want to go to Peggy's house to play kickball. You notice what's going on in here. We have a lot of letter reversals, right? We're talking about reversing B and D, P and Q. We have letter reversals going on. We have some words reversed, in fact, and we're able to read these words, but they really don't make much sense, right? It's hard to get any context out of them and to figure out what exactly is going on. And in fact, some of the words might have been so confusing that you just skipped over them. And that's what we see individuals with dyslexia doing a lot. When they try to read, they often get very frustrated and words seem jumbled to them and they just end up skipping over them. They have a hard time decoding them, so they'll read a word, skip over, go to another word. And as you can imagine, once they get to the end of what they're reading, it's very difficult for them to recall what they read because they maybe only read with 50% reading accuracy, 60% accuracy, and that's not going to give them a good idea of what they read. So they have a hard time repeating the information that they just saw. Now, the green lines represent severe dyslexia. And if you're like me, when you look at these sentences, you really just even want to skip over them. It's so hard to even decode what's going on or to get a basic idea of what these words even mean. It's really, really frustrating, right? And this is what we see with students who have severe dyslexia. They get so frustrated even trying to look at words and to read them and decode them. We'll even see physical signs like they might physically turn away from the page and have reactions like that because reading is such a frustrating and a difficult experience for them. Nancy and I did this simulation for parents a few weeks ago, and one of the parents said that when she tried to read these lines, she just felt like sitting down and crying because she was so frustrated. And so you'll notice that those are just very, very difficult to read, and it would be hard to get any information from those. So here are the actual sentences. So for a typical reader, this is what they would have been reading and the information they would have been able to get from it. After mowing the lawn, Dad asked Paul to help rake the yard. Just rake up the clippings and put them in the compost pile. Paul was eager to help Dad, but the yard was really big and he wanted to go to Peggy's house to play kickball. So Paul went inside to ask his brother Bobby to help him, and so on. We read this, it's easy to read, right? It's like our minds go, we can read this, we can get through it, we can understand what's being said. So as I mentioned, dyslexia comes in different degrees, and the different students that you see with dyslexia will often have different degrees of dyslexia. So the first one that we talk about is mild dyslexia. And mild dyslexia often goes unnoticed. A person with mild dyslexia may think, wow, I really seem to have more trouble learning to read or more trouble reading than other people. They often don't like to do it that much because it's kind of tiring for them. And they may not read for enjoyment, but they may not have difficulty to the point where they really realize that they have dyslexia or feel like there's an issue that they need help with. Next, we have moderate to severe dyslexia. So this is often noticed, but it sometimes goes undiagnosed. And a student with moderate to severe dyslexia will have quite a bit of trouble reading. For example, if they read out loud at age-appropriate material, you might notice that they're skipping words, that they're reversing words here and there. They have a very difficult time with reading accuracy, and they probably have a difficult time with reading comprehension as well. And even at this point, they may not realize they have dyslexia. They're just thinking that, well, they have trouble with reading, they have trouble with spelling. And unfortunately, what we sometimes see is that students with dyslexia who don't realize they have dyslexia start suffering from a drop in self-esteem. They start to think, wow, I don't know what's going on here, but I have a lot of trouble reading. None of my friends have trouble reading. I have trouble completing my school assignments because of reading difficulties. I don't know what's going on here. And we often see that affects self-esteem in students. Next, we have severe to profound dyslexia. And this may be diagnosed, but sometimes the wrong intervention is provided for it. And severe dyslexia, a student who has this will have a great deal of difficulty reading and spelling. They'll tend to probably guess at words constantly because they're not able to properly decode them. Reading will tend to be very, very exhausting for them, and they'll probably just avoid assignments just because they have so much trouble reading and it's so frustrating for them. So reading assignments, they just may put them off, avoid them. Other assignments that just require reading, they may avoid those as well. And so it creates all kinds of difficulty in them completing their schoolwork and being able to participate in class as well. I wanted to mention, we actually have a bunch of videos on YouTube on the Dyslexia Connect YouTube channel. So if you're interested in learning more about the degrees of dyslexia or different issues with dyslexia, feel free to check us out on there because we have a lot of informational videos available. So I'd like to take a moment now and ask you some questions. So what did you experience during that simulation? Did you feel frustrated? Did you feel angry that you just weren't able to read the sentences? What kind of feelings did you have? Did you feel sad? What kind of feelings did you have while doing that? And if you could go ahead and write your comments in the chat box, Gary will actually be able to pass those on to me, and I would like to share some of the feelings that you had during that simulation. Also, what did you learn about dyslexia during that simulation? Is there something you realized that you maybe didn't know previously? Can you think of ways to help a child who may have some of those feelings during school? And what accommodations might help a student? Yeah, do we have any comments, Gary?
Yeah, we have frustrated, gave up, walked away from the reading. I felt extremely tired.
Yeah.
Confused. The example of severe was enlightening.
Thank you for your comments. Yeah, that is very much what I feel when I try to read those sentences as well. I feel tired and I feel frustrated and have the temptation to just give up trying to read those because it's so hard and so difficult. And that is what those students are experiencing as well. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, do we have any more comments at all?
Yeah, I also noticed that the space between the end of one word and the beginning of another was unclear. Space between words was meaningless.
Yes.
Also felt like Peter was being unrealistic in his expectations and with a smiley face.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The smiley face. I just found some random clip art with reactions, and nobody is going to have a smiley face after trying to read those sentences, right? Definitely not. That's a great comment about the space between words. What we often find with students who have dyslexia when they're reading is they often do not notice those spaces or end up sort of pronouncing words together. Something else we notice is that they have a lot of trouble with punctuation, and this creates a lot of difficulty with reading flow. So for example, they might be going along, and when there's a period, they don't see the period. They actually just read right over it and continue into the next sentence. And as you can imagine, this tends to create one big long run-on sentence with their reading, which makes it very difficult to understand. So often—
Here's a good one, Peter, by the way.
Oh yeah.
And suddenly I need to see the nurse or get a drink of water because this is hard.
Yes, yes, absolutely, and that brings up another great point. What we see with a lot of students who have dyslexia is we see the emergence of avoidance techniques. And so, like you said, they'll try to go out and get a drink. They'll say that they need to go see the nurse. Sometimes we see students with dyslexia in class trying to create distractions because they're afraid of being found out and having to read something out loud in class. So they'll tend to create disruptions just so that they don't have to, so people don't realize that they're not able to complete the work. So that is a great point. Yeah, well, thank you very much for your comments. Those are excellent comments and hit along a lot of points that I wanted to discuss with that. So I should mention that dyslexia is not seen backwards. It's a disconnect in the processing of language in the brain. As we looked at in that dyslexia definition, dyslexia is a neurological issue. And so it's a disconnect in the processing of written language. And it's not actually seeing things backwards all the time. It's a disconnect. All right, I have another task I'd like you to try here if you're not too tired from that last one. So with this, I would like you to take 1 minute and try to answer as many of these questions as you can. Question number 1 is, how many years are represented on this calendar? 2, on what day of the week is Christmas 2024? 3, how many months in 2023 have 5 Sundays? 4, what day of the week will your birthday be on in the year 2025? 5, which years will be a leap year, and on what day of the week will leap day fall? So I'm going to give you a minute just to look at these and see if you can come up with some of the answers for those. And you can basically just read those and think what your answers are, and then we're going to discuss what this task is like in just a moment. Okay, I think we'll go on and discuss this. So is this a manageable task? It seems like it is, right? We have all the information that we need laid out for us, and I probably didn't give you enough time there, but if I did give you enough time to look at it and to look through the information, you would probably be able to answer those questions because the information is there, the questions are laid out clearly, and you can probably go through and find information that you need. Now let's try this. I'm going to give you a minute with this as well. So number 1, how many years are presented on this calendar, I should say. On what day of the week is Christmas 2024? How many months in 2023 have 5 Sundays? 4, what day of the week will your birthday be on in the year 2025? And which years will be a leap year, and on what day of the week will the leap day fall? Okay, so is this a manageable task? It's way more difficult, right? This is not really a manageable task, in fact. And what's the problem? What makes it difficult, or why is it not a manageable task? Because all students have access technically to the same information, right? The information is all jumbled up. We're not able to simply look at the calendars and say, I see exactly what's going on here. I know what I need to do. The information is all jumbled. What would we need to do before being able to complete this assignment? We would need to organize the information, right? It would be incredibly difficult to do this if we didn't first start by organizing information. And of course, if we were doing this in person, probably what we would do is we would take the different calendar entries and we would line them up and put them in the correct spots so that we could easily identify them and easily refer to them. But that's the first thing that we would have to do to actually be able to even try to do this task. Do you think it would be difficult to persevere with this task when your friends are all finished and you have not even answered the first question? It would probably feel really frustrating, right? And I did this exercise today because students with dyslexia organize information differently than students who do not have dyslexia. And it often takes them more time to be able to organize that information. So when a student who does not have dyslexia looks at a task, they often see the information, they see the questions, and they say, yeah, this isn't bad at all. I see what I'm supposed to do, and I can look at the info and I can answer these questions. A student with dyslexia looks at that information and it may seem completely jumbled up to them. They may have a hard time following the directions, and they need to take a lot of time just to organize that info before they are even able to start completing it. So I'd like to have you try to do one more activity today before we go on to some symptoms of dyslexia and some myths about dyslexia. So if you have a pen and paper or pencil and paper available, I would like you to write your name on it. If you don't have a pen and paper available, you can also just use your finger if you want to sign your name on your desk or the table that you're sitting at. Okay, now I would like you to move your right foot on the floor in a clockwise circle. And with your foot still moving in a clockwise circle, I would like you to try to sign your name as you did before. If you're like me, that's pretty difficult, right? your name might be a little bit wobbly. It might be hard to form those letters. I have a hard time doing that and actually getting a legible signature. A lot of students who have dyslexia also have a condition called dysgraphia. And dysgraphia makes penmanship and also writing composition very difficult. So sometimes students are not only struggling with reading and spelling, but they also have dysgraphia. So they're struggling just to form letters to be able to write a sentence or to be able to compose their thoughts, to be able to write an essay. So these are conditions that we do see together quite a bit. A lot of the students we work with have both dyslexia and dysgraphia. And so that provides an additional challenge to having them write material and even just to writing sentences and paragraphs. I wanted to mention, if you haven't seen it before, Understandorg is a really, really great resource for information on dyslexia and other learning issues. And they have a great simulation generator in which you can create a simulation for a child's particular issues. So it can be ADHD or dyslexia or dysgraphia. And it's nice to be able to do that because you can customize it based on what a child is struggling with and get a simulation based on that. They also have just a lot of great information on their website. I wanted to mention, if you have any questions today that you're not able to ask during the question answer session, please feel free to contact me. You can contact me at info@dyslexiaconnect.com. You can also go to our website, which is dyslexiaconnect.com, and submit a message on any of the contact forms. And I would be happy to answer your questions or also provide you with resources if you would like. Also, if you would like a PDF of today's slides that I'm using for the presentation, just send me an email. I'd be happy to send that along to you as well. So I'd like to take a moment and talk about the myths about dyslexia. There are a lot of myths about what dyslexia is. And unfortunately, these myths misinform people about the nature of dyslexia. And of course, they make it more difficult to actually see dyslexia when we encounter a student who has it, because they give a misinterpretation of the information and the difficulties that somebody with dyslexia experiences. So, myth number one, all children with dyslexia read and write backwards. That's a pretty common myth. And in fact, in all of my years working with students who have dyslexia, it's been about 16 or 17 years now, I've only seen kids who regularly write and read backwards probably 3 or 4 times, 3 or 4 cases where I worked with students. So, and even those kids who did do that, they didn't do it all the time. So maybe I would be having them write a series of words and they would write 3 or 4 words front to back, but then they would reverse the next one. And so even in kids who have that symptom, it's not very common. And in fact, some kids with dyslexia don't do that at all. Myth number two, dyslexia can be cured. As I mentioned, dyslexia is a neurological condition. So an individual who has dyslexia for their entire life. There isn't any cure for dyslexia. But with the right approach, a student with dyslexia can learn to read and spell well. Myth number three, dyslexia is an indicator of low IQ. This is definitely not true. I work with all kinds of students who are brilliant who have dyslexia. And in fact, dyslexia exists across the entire spectrum of intelligence. Number four, children with dyslexia just need to try harder. In fact, most kids with dyslexia work really, really hard. They're just not able to complete work because they need a different approach to things and they need accommodations and a different approach to reading. So typically effort is not the issue. Most of them work incredibly hard when they're trying to complete things. Myth number five, dyslexia is a vision problem. Dyslexia is not related to vision or vision issues. Since it's a neurological issue, it doesn't have anything to do with vision or a student's eyes. So as a result, dyslexia cannot be improved by vision therapy since it's not a vision issue. Number 6, dyslexia is caused by not reading enough at home. As I mentioned, dyslexia is a genetic condition. It's usually inherited and it's neurological. So it's not caused by not reading enough at home, and it can't be cured, in fact, by reading a lot. If a person has dyslexia, they have it for their entire life. Number 7, dyslexia is a catch-all term. Dyslexia has a very specific set of symptoms and parameters, in fact. So it isn't a catch-all term. It's a very specific definition. Myth number 8, dyslexia is uncommon. As we saw, it's estimated that 5 to 10% of people in the world have dyslexia. So it's not uncommon. It's fairly common, in fact. So getting back to my student Oscar, what were his dyslexia symptoms and what are typical symptoms of dyslexia? Well, one of them is trouble learning letter names and remembering the sounds they make. This is very, very common. Confusing letters that look similar, like B, D, P, and Q, as I mentioned before. Struggles reading familiar words like cat or the, especially if there aren't pictures. Something we often see with students is they may read a word correctly and misread a word in the same sentence if it occurs again, or simply in the next sentence. If they see the word cat, they may say it correctly one sentence and misread it the next. This is a very typical symptom. Substituting words when reading aloud, like saying house when the story says home. This is a very interesting one. So the way that the mind with dyslexia works is that sometimes it just substitutes in other words that are actual synonyms. What's very interesting about this is sometimes we see that the synonyms that the student substitutes are actually much more complex words than the ones that are actually on the page. So that's a very interesting thing to see. Trouble hearing individual sounds in words and blending sounds to make a word. So this is a matter of being able to tell that a word has different sounds, different phonemes in it, and being able to sound those out to make the word. Trouble remembering how words are spelled and applying spelling rules in writing. What we often see is that a lot of our really smart students who have dyslexia, they just try to memorize everything. So they read almost completely from memory because they have a hard time decoding words and actually reading them. So they'll remember words by shape or by their length or the first letter that occurs in the word. And so they tend to basically just memorize things and guess. And of course, as the reading material gets more complex, this leads to all kinds of problems with reading accuracy because they start encountering words that they don't have memorized. And it affects their reading accuracy and their comprehension. So you notice there are a lot of different systems. Here's some more right here. Confusing or skipping small words, spelling the same word correctly and incorrectly in the same exercise, avoiding reading whenever possible or getting frustrated or upset when reading. We can relate to that, right? After the dyslexia simulation, it's easy to just look at those sentences and just get very frustrated and not wanting to try to read them. Constant struggles with reading accuracy. And finally, an intelligent child who cannot seem to make progress in reading and spelling, and there isn't another explanation. This is an interesting one because sometimes we see a student who is very, very smart, obviously intelligent, but for some reason they can't seem to pick up on reading. And a lot of these students, in fact, have dyslexia. And that's the reason why they're struggling with reading, but not struggling with anything else. And they often excel in many other areas. Each individual with dyslexia has a unique combination of dyslexia symptoms. And this makes it very interesting to work with students who have dyslexia because we see a vast variety of combinations when it comes to the symptoms of dyslexia and the degrees of dyslexia. So each child with dyslexia may have a variety of symptoms. I should mention there are certain common symptoms that we do see in most students who have dyslexia. One of those would be the difficulty with B, D, P, and Q, for example, difficulties with reading accuracy, trouble learning letter sounds and connecting those to the words that they're reading. Those are very common and we tend to see those in, I would say, most students who have dyslexia. But there are other ones that one student may have and another student with dyslexia does not. So how do we help students like Oscar to read? Well, structured literacy methods are the key. And A very well-known structural literacy method is the Orton-Gillingham method. And the Orton-Gillingham method, I believe, has been around for about 70 years now. And it's a proven and highly respected method for helping children with dyslexia learn to read and spell. Orton-Gillingham is what we use at Dyslexia Connect, actually, and it's very well known, highly effective, and it's been around for a long time, so it has a long track record. There are also a lot of methods that are based on Orton-Gillingham, and we say that these are in the Orton-Gillingham family because they share the same philosophy and very, very similar methods. And some of these methods are Wilson, Slingerland, Take Flight, and some other methods that we consider to be in the Orton-Gillingham family. And those methods are all highly effective. So Orton-Gillingham and the methods in the Orton-Gillingham family provide an explicit, structured approach to reading and spelling. They focus on the fundamentals. I should mention, with older students, this can sometimes be a hard sell, but it is so worth it because it really works. And it was definitely a hard sell with Oscar. He had been struggling for years and he was very resistant to tutoring. When I started working with him, probably for the first 3 or 4 months, he did not like tutoring and he made that very clear to me. He also did not seem to like me very much. So it was pretty rough going for the first 3 or 4 months, but I'd say after 4 months, we started to have some breakthroughs and he started to make some improvements. And he also started to get to know me better. And then everything completely changed. It's like he was a completely different student. He started showing up at sessions and working really hard. He had a positive attitude. He was energetic and positive during sessions. And once that happened, he started making a lot of progress. And that's often what we see with students who have dyslexia. They've experienced so much failure in their lives and they've gotten so frustrated that they're sometimes resistant to the correct method that they need to make progress when it first begins. But once they start seeing the results, they really become committed, and often we see their attitudes change, their self-esteem gets better, and it's like they become completely different students. So these methods focus on different areas. One of them is phonemic awareness. So students learn not only basic letter sounds, but also more complex letter combinations and learn to identify them in isolation and in the context of words. And to work on sounds, we often use phonics flashcards. That's how we work on them in isolation. These methods also teach syllable rules. So students learn to identify and reproduce the major syllable types of English, such as the closed syllable, silent E syllable, open syllable, vowel combination, and others. And they learn to break words down into syllables. For example, we'll sometimes give them 3-syllable words, 4-syllable words. We'll ask them to split them apart and then identify what the syllable types are for each of those syllables. These methods also teach decoding skills. And with decoding skills, students learn to apply phonics and syllable rule knowledge while they're reading words. A really, really useful thing for practicing this are nonsense words. Nonsense words are great because, as I mentioned previously, a lot of kids with dyslexia fall in the habit of guessing at everything. They basically try to memorize all the words that they need to be able to read. They guess at words, so they'll see the first letter of a word and they'll just fill in the rest, fill in the blanks and guess at it. Nonsense words are great because, of course, they probably haven't seen these words before. They're nonsense words. And so they give the student practice actually sounding word out phonetically and applying their syllable knowledge in a way that they may not be able to with real words because they may have those words memorized. So nonsense words are great. And in fact, you can buy entire books that are just full of sample nonsense words to use with students that are excellent for that. These methods also focus on reading fluency. So this is often part of a tutoring session or instructional session with the teacher that all those different elements really come together. So the students read out loud and are monitored by their teacher and their tutor while reading level appropriate materials. This is a really important point here because something about the Orton-Gillingham method and other structured literacy methods is that we don't introduce reading material with phonetic sounds and syllable types that the student has not learned and mastered yet. It's very much mastery based and a building block process. So for example, if we were working with a student and they have not yet learned the OW sound and the sounds that the OW combination makes, we would not use reading material that has the OW in it yet. We would wait until we introduced that in flashcards, we talked about it, we practiced spelling with it, and the student has mastered it, and then we would use that sound in the reading material. Reading accuracy is a big struggle for students with dyslexia, especially when they have developed bad reading habits. One of those habits, as I mentioned, is guessing at words. And it can often take months to help a student break that habit of constantly guessing at words. And what's really interesting is sometimes we see, even after a student with dyslexia has gotten very good at reading and very good at decoding words and being able to read sentences, sometimes when they're tired or they're just having a bad day, they will fall back on guessing, even though they have all the skills they need and all the tools they need to actually read the word properly. So we'll have to tell them, like, no, that's not the word. Try again. Make sure you use your skills, apply your knowledge, and then they'll read the word correctly instead of guessing. And while they're reading, they focus on applying their knowledge of phonics and syllable rules. Dyslexia really represents neurodiversity in the classroom because students with dyslexia often think in unconventional and unique ways, and they can contribute a lot to the classroom. And part of the reason why we see so many successful entrepreneurs and people in different fields who are very successful with dyslexia is the fact that they tend to think outside the box. They tend to think in unconventional ways. Many students with dyslexia are considered 2E or twice exceptional. And of course, that means that they have struggles, academic struggles in certain areas, reading and spelling, comprehension, writing composition, typically, but they also have tremendous strengths in others. And to fully see these strengths in the classroom, kids with dyslexia often need accommodations. So what are some of these strengths that we see with kids who have dyslexia? Well, they're often highly creative in the arts. My student Oscar is an amazing artist, actually, and sometimes his mom would give me little thank you cards that had things that he had drawn on the front of them. And that is not unusual. Many of the students who I've worked with over the years are very talented in music or art. Um, Students with dyslexia are often very creative thinkers and problem solvers. And that's another reason why we see so many successful entrepreneurs with dyslexia. They also tend to be very good at seeing the big picture. So they can see a lot of information and kind of figure out what the big picture is and how to proceed with something. They also tend to have great spatial reasoning skills. So we see a lot of kids with dyslexia who end up being engineers. Sometimes they'll be very interested in mechanics and they'll take apart engines and put them back together. And many of them have very good spatial reasoning. So I mentioned that to be able to see these strengths in the classroom and on the work that they're doing at home, we often need to provide them with accommodations. And here are some great accommodations for students with dyslexia. Audiobooks are excellent. Audiobooks can help a student with dyslexia complete their reading assignments. The other thing this helps with, audiobooks can also help them stay interested in books, even if they're currently struggling with their reading. So when they listen to audiobooks and they say, hey, this is really cool, I like these stories, it's fun to listen to stories, they'll have positive association with books, and that will help them stay positive about books as they're working to improve their own reading skills. Simplified or highlighted directions are really great for kids with dyslexia. We did that one exercise having to arrange the information with calendars, right, and answer those questions. And any way that directions can be simplified or highlighted is going to help them. For homework, step-by-step instructions are extremely beneficial. It takes time for them to organize their thoughts and to organize the information they're seeing. So if they have step-by-step directions, that's going to really help them a lot. Teachers may also be able to provide typed out notes on lessons they're teaching. Taking notes can be really difficult for a student who has dyslexia. They have a hard time writing quickly enough, and of course they may have dysgraphia as well, and so this can cause a lot of difficulty trying to take notes. So if you can print out notes for them and provide them notes that way, they'll be able to study on these in class and also take them home and use them for assignments. Another option is to allow students to take pictures of the whiteboard. If they happen to have something with them where they can take pictures, they can take pictures of the whiteboard and then refer to those pictures to get the notes when they're at home. It's also beneficial to give them extra time to read and write. As we looked at in the dyslexia simulation, it can be really tough and frustrating for them to try to read, right? And so we often need to give them extra time to be able to read, to be able to organize information, to be able to get that information. Examples of correct work are another excellent accommodation for students with dyslexia. If they have a filled out example or assignment that they can look at, this is really going to help them be able to organize their own thoughts and complete the assignment. Another one we often suggest is allowing them to not have to read out loud in class. Sometimes kids with dyslexia get very, very self-conscious about their struggles with reading, and they feel really ashamed if other people know that they're struggling like that. So we usually recommend that they're allowed to not have to read out loud in class, since that can be a really difficult experience for them. Also, since they need more time to process information and to write things, extra time on quizzes and exams is really beneficial. And I should mention that accommodations need to be customized to the particular student. Since dyslexia comes in such a wide variety of symptoms and degrees, we often need to look at the particular student and see which accommodations would help them. Sometimes certain accommodations will be incredibly beneficial to one student with dyslexia, but in fact, another student with dyslexia might need some different ones to help them out. All right, well, that's the end of my presentation today. I wanted to mention again, if you have any questions at all after the presentation today, please feel free to contact me at dyslexiaconnect.com. You can also connect with us on social media if you want to send me a message on there or would like me to share any resources. And right now, I'd like to open the session to questions or comments. So if you'd like to share those in the chat box, Gary will be able to read those for me, and I'll hopefully be able to answer your questions. So do we have any questions in the inbox there, Gary?
Not yet.
Okay. No, it was a lot of information and a lot of information to absorb. And maybe while we're waiting to see if anybody has any questions, I can mention a little bit more about those behavior issues that we talked about a little bit previously in the presentation. We mentioned that sometimes a student with dyslexia will be trying to go out of the classroom a lot, to get a drink, they'll say that they need to go to the nurse. That's a pretty typical coping mechanism we see because they often feel overwhelmed by the assignments they're given, and they're very afraid of failing. They often feel like they failed a lot in their school careers, in homework and in schoolwork, and they are very afraid of failing again. And so they'll often just try to avoid things no matter what that way. And when working with students with dyslexia, an important thing is to establish an environment that they know that it's not an area where they're going to fail. You know, we're going to work on some phonics flashcards, but if you don't get these right, it's not a failure. You're eventually going to get them and you're going to know them. And it's important to encourage them and make them realize that everybody's going to make mistakes or not know things along the way. And that's how you get on the path to learn more and to improve.
We got a couple comments here, Peter.
Excellent.
One is, are there other intervention programs or materials that you would recommend?
Yeah, I would recommend, as I mentioned, anything that's based on the Orton-Gillingham method or Orton-Gillingham itself. Those methods tend to be highly effective, and they have a great approach, and they really help students make progress. So I think some of the other ones I can mention, I think I mentioned Orton-Gillingham, Wilson, Slingerland is another one.
One of our sponsors is the Sunday program, which is another program that's very popular in Wisconsin right now.
Oh, right. I believe Sunday is based on Orton-Gillingham as well. Structured, explicit phonics approach to reading. So yeah, so I believe Sunday is based on Orton-Gillingham as well.
Yeah.
Orton-Gillingham method. So yep, so that's another highly effective method. And we see some others. I think those are probably the most well known. But I mentioned Understandorg before, and actually in their article about dyslexia, they have a great section that just talks about remediation for dyslexia, and that discusses some of the different methods, like Orton Gillingham, Wilson, Take Flight, and so on.
And another comment that we have is related to including dyslexia as an eligibility category for special education. And I can jump in on that a little bit.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Perspective of being the executive director for the Wisconsin affiliate of CASE. As a disability classification, they've looked at that many times over, and they have found that it gets too complicated to start feathering out the different types of disabilities rather than just lumping it into a special learning disabilities category. So dyslexia is one of those that fit under that, and it would be eligible for an IEP and remediation programs. But most of the time when we look at legislation on that, there's a lot of pushback to have dyslexia as a separate special education category.
It's very interesting. Yeah, thank you for answering that, Gary.
Sure. Then another comment, this is terrific information about dyslexia and effective interventions that has been lost over the years. So you're getting some nice comments on that.
Oh, excellent. Thank you very much. Yeah. Yeah, there are.
One person, by the way, did say that in Florida, dyslexia falls under SLD. So, and also in Michigan, as it does in Wisconsin.
Okay, interesting. I know there's been a lot of legislation around the country in the past 2 or 3 years, and in fact, on the International Dyslexia Association's website, they have, I think, a map that tracks the different legislation that's going on and different changes in school systems around the country. So that's interesting. Yeah. Do we have any more questions at all?
Nope, that's pretty much it, Peter. It's many compliments, by the way. I should mention that. And
oh, well, thank you.
So
thank you so much for attending, everybody. I'm just so happy that you took time out of your busy schedule to attend today, and feel free to contact me if you have any questions or would like directions to other resources. I would be happy to provide that.
Thank you very much, Peter. I enjoyed this presentation also. You did a nice job of providing examples and having the opportunity for people to experience dyslexia, which is always a good way to have a sensitivity to what students are feeling in the classroom. So thank you very much.
Great. And thank you very much, Gary. Thank you for hosting.
Yes. And with that, I would like to thank everybody who is still in this room. We really appreciate your participation. This does conclude the CASE Fall Conference, and we hope you have a very wonderful day. And in Wisconsin, it is currently 73 degrees. And so as soon as this computer is shut off, I am going outside.
That's a great idea. I'm also in Wisconsin, definitely going on a hike today.
Very good. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.